What's going on, guys? It's Bromley at Empire Barbell, and today we're going to talk about two of my favorite exercises for hamstring development, the glute ham raise and the Nordic hamstring curl. So with GHR, glute ham raise on a glute ham deck, the GHD, and this is very useful for doing sit-ups and doing back extensions, but specifically what you can do on this is a very unique movement that is very productive, very functional for building strength in your hamstrings in a way that makes you better at pretty much all hip extension type movements, squats, deadlifts, athletic stuff, but it also makes your hamstrings bulletproof. It keeps them invulnerable from injury and strains and tears and all the things that happen down the pike. Now, GHRs are very difficult. It's not as easy as doing a back extension. It's a lot harder, and it's going to expose a lot of weaknesses in your hamstrings right off the bat. So we're going to cover how you build into those. If you can already hop on a GHD and clip off a bunch of raises without a problem, congratulations, you have very strong hamstrings. For the rest of us, we have to ease into it a little bit. I actually had to spend the better part of 6 weeks getting comfortable with this before I could actually do a few reps at my body weight. And even now, it's not easy. I have to warm up, I have to stretch. So looking at it from the start, you're gonna have your knees on this pad. Not every GHD has this pad, in which case you're just gonna have to put a lot more pressure through the foot plate. But your feet are going to funnel through the pads, feet on the plate. And the thing is with this pad, the lower it is, the easier it is. So starting out, you want this pad lower. As you raise it up, it gets a lot more difficult. Now, what makes the GHR so difficult and why this is relevant right here is because you're contracting the hamstring from both ends. It crosses both your hip and knee joint. So you can anchor it at your knee, anchor your hamstring at your knee, and you can extend your hip, and that works your hamstrings. Or you can anchor your hip and you can flex your knee, just like with a hamstring curl, and that also works your hamstrings. This is going to contract it from both ends, and you will feel that when you come up. So when you raise this up, that angle of knee flexion is quite a bit steeper, and that's what makes it a lot more difficult. So I start with it low. You wanna make sure the spacing is appropriate to start off with. The first thing we're gonna do are some band assisted GHRs, and then I'll explain how you wanna progress those to steadily get better at this movement until you can clip them off with a 100-pound plate behind your neck. So you're gonna saddle up, start with one leg hopping over, use the handles, pull yourself into position, feet situated hard against the plate, heels up, flush against the pad. Now the idea is to start with your hips fully extended. You're gonna start with a mini band. You don't want it too tense or else the movement's gonna be worthless. You don't want it too light or else you might risk overloading your hamstring, which we don't wanna do. You wanna find an appropriate amount of tension. You're gonna keep it glued right to your head. Now the goal is to try and stay flush. Try and stay square. Don't let the band pull you off to one side. And what you're going to do, hips through, is you're going to very slowly extend forward, keeping pressure up on the pad, keeping your hips extended. You want to straighten your knees all the way, and then you're going to reverse direction by pushing your knees down and coming up into a finished GHR position. Now, I like to emphasize the top half because it's the difficult part. If you go through the full GHR where you go into a full back extension, complete that, and then come up the rest of the way, it's more difficult. It's going to take the hamstring through a much fuller range of motion, but the back extension tends to be relatively easy. The top half is where people struggle. So I like to target this specific range because as I got better at that, I found that my ability to do a full regular GHR got a lot better. So a full GHR going through the full range is going to be the same cues, heels up against the pad, hips extended, glutes tight. You want to keep your belly tight. You're coming down. Okay, knees extended. Now you're flat. Now you go into hip flexion. So now the ham knees are fully lengthened, and then you come up, hips through, and then knees into the pad and finish. And you want to get to the point where you can do that in one fluid motion. Hips through, knees into the pad, extend all the way up. And already right there, I feel the amount of work my hamstrings are doing. Eventually you get to the point where you can come down with control and then drive back up, and you'll really feel those hamstrings having to kick into overdrive to pull that off. Now, the way I like progressing movements like this, where we are up against our own body weight, it would be like if I had to bench 500 pounds, but that was the only working weight I could use. So the only way I could get used to it is by taking resistance off with bands or with assistance or whatever else. The load is still very heavy. The stress is still very high. So I don't want to move into handling the weight as quick as possible because I need more time to train. I need a bigger background of base. I need a wider base to be able to stand a chance of moving that weight. So instead, I'm going to find an appropriate amount of assistance, something that isn't too easy, but not too difficult. I'm going to practice perfect technique, and I'm going to practice filling out the amount of work I'm doing, getting more comfortable at a given threshold before moving up. So it's almost a form of step loading. So what I want to do is find the right amount of band tension that lets me do a requisite amount of reps. With this, it might be 5, it might be 8, and then I'm going to add sets. Every time I do it, I'll go from 3 sets, then to 4, then to 5. I might go up higher. Eventually it becomes so easy and routine that I drop back down, and now I'm doing more reps, and then I fill out that amount of work. If it gets to the point where it's too easy, you can reset and take band tension away. So now you're closer to handling your own body weight, and repeat. Before you start trying to clip these off with just your body weight, I really recommend getting to the point where you're using very light band tension and you're comfortably able to get through repeating sets of 8 to 10 without burning out. I also don't recommend taking them all to failure, because every time you go to failure, your performance on each subsequent set drops. So you might get a hard 8, and then you might get a hard 5, and then eventually you're lucky to do 1 or 2. And that's not nearly as productive as if you keep the first couple of sets reduced in effort, and you can do more volume overall because you're not hitting that fatigue wall so quick. So just like I said with pull-ups and chin-ups in the past and with other modes of training, where I like to take your time, fill out the amount of work you're doing, progress evenly, increase the volume, then increase the rep count. Then finally, as a last resort, when it is just so painfully easy, then I want you to take band tension away to make it a little bit heavier and repeat. If you do that, you might run through it for 3 months, and before you know it, you're clipping off bodyweight GHRs without a problem, and that's gonna mean your hamstrings are just brutally strong. So now we're gonna go over a variation of a GHR, which uses a little bit less equipment and might actually be an easier way to ease into the difficulty of doing an actual full range GHR. And that is a Nordic hamstring curl. Now you'll see this a lot in sports programs. You'll see it in, football weight rooms. They'll do this type of exercise. It's a good way to load the hammy with an eccentric and get it used to that type of tension so the hamstrings are more resilient. It's a good way to slowly adapt to the difficulty of doing something like a GHR, and it requires less equipment. The easiest way is just to have a partner you trust. That's important. Someone you trust is not going to let you fall on your face. Hold your heels down, or just find something you can put your heels up against. I'm using the bottom of our hip belt squat. I've seen people load barbells and put them in the bottom of the squat rack to the front so they don't roll, and put their heels under that. As long as you have a sufficient amount of weight that is not going to flip over once you're all the way spread out. Now notice I said earlier, degree of knee flexion is going to determine difficulty. This is pretty high up relative to something like a barbell. This puts me at that negative knee angle relative to the floor. So this is going to be a lot harder for me. So it's a good way to kick up the intensity. Now what I like to do here is really emphasize the negative. That's big, because you're going to find as you lay out, it gets harder, 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 harder. The deeper you can go while maintaining control, the more you are going to get out of it. Developmentally, your coordination is going to improve. You're going to have more confidence. Neurologically, you're just going to perform better at that phase. And then eventually you'll be able to do reverse direction under control, which again suggests that you've gotten a lot stronger and your hammies are a lot more resilient. Once you get to the bottom, you are going to get into a push-up position, and you're going to give just a little push to get yourself going, to get some momentum so your hamstrings can finish the job. So we have a controlled negative to an assisted concentric, and we repeat that cycle. We increase this the exact same way we would something like the band assisted GHR, where we are trying to increase the amount of work we do. Then we'll work on increasing reps. Then eventually you can actually start to limit how much pushing you're doing to where you have your hands behind your back and you're going through the full thing by yourself. So it's going to look like this: heels under the whatever you're using for support, okay, hips through, and you want to fight on the way down. Keep those hammies tight, nice and slow. Be ready to catch yourself and push. And already right there, that's substantially harder with my knee angle the way it is than doing the full range GHRs. So I'm going to go again, nice and slow, control, control, control. And it's up to me to really regulate rep to rep exactly how much assistance I need and how hard I can control that eccentric. So even doing something like this, even though I can clip off GHRs in pretty comfortable fashion, this shows that you can always kick it up a notch. You can always make it a little harder. So this is also one of my favorites. So that's all for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Leave any other questions you have in the comments box, or go ahead and start a thread at empire-forum.com. Thanks again. Until next time, it's Bromley at Empire Barbell. I'll see you.